So, to wrap up our first episode on Planescape, I decided to come up with a list of my recommendations. If you're trying to get into Planescape, which books should you look at? Firstly, I can say, there are a bunch of Planescape novels. Don't read any of them. Even by the standards of D&D novels, just don't.
Oh no.
I haven't read any myself, I've just seen other people's reviews, and I know the general opinion is very low.
Ugh.
And also, if you want to get into Planescape, just go play Planescape Torment. That is absolutely the best way to get into it. But, assuming that you want to look at some of the D&D books, assuming that you might want some of the print-on-demand books, I have most, but not all, of the print-on-demand books. So, there's a few more that I haven't read, and all the stuff that's not print-on-demand yet, I have not looked at. So, this isn't every single thing that's out there, but I decided to make my top 5 recommendations of what is really good. And if you know anything about my top 5s that I've done before, you will not be surprised that there are 11 things on the list.
Classic James.
That's just how it goes, really, right?
Yeah.
So, the first recommendation is the really obvious one, but it's obvious for a reason. It's the Planescape campaign setting. Originally, it was a box set. I shelled out the money to get the actual box set for this one, and honestly, it was kind of worth it. It is such a good overview of the entire setting. The print-on-demand version is just one big fat book that's got everything reproduced in it. So this has got an overview of Sigil, it's got an overview of all of the planes, it's got an overview of all the factions, it's got maps and charts of everything. There's a couple of very short little introductory adventures. One to just get you out into the plane, and one very tiny one that you can do while you're there. But really, just if you want to get an idea of how the whole thing hangs together, this is what you need. Alternatively, there is the Planewalker's Handbook, which is really like a player's handbook just for Planescape.
Should I be reading this?
Yeah, you can if you want. It's quite good.
Okay.
And so this one is much more about everything your players need to know to be able to understand the setting. What are all the different types of portals? How do all of them work? What are all the different races? How do they all work? How do all the spells work? Because in 2nd edition they had the rules for how every different type of magic was affected by which planes that came from and which planes you would go into. And so the Planewalker's Handbook is meant to be the same sort of information, but player focused rather than DM focused. So once you've got them, you need to get an idea of what's actually out there. If you want more of an idea of what's actually there in the Planescape setting. And so this is where I've got my next 3 are honourable mentions. I wasn't wildly impressed by them, but at the same time, I felt like they were just utterly essential. You just have to get them. Because Planescape is so big, the core box set could not go into sufficient detail about everything. There's just too much. So the Planes of Lore, Planes of Conflict, and Planes of Chaos go through all the outer planes, which are your sort of heavens and hells, and they give much more detail. They're all structured in a slightly different way, which is weird. But it's got information about what you'll find on each plane, what all the different layers
Would you say
on the
that
planes.
the lawful ones are structured very structurally and the chaos ones are a bit jump?
No, I think it's just their printing requirements.
Okay.
So one of them had a separate little book for each one of the planes, and one of them did, here is a player's book about all of the planes, and here's a DM's book about all of the planes. And then the other one, I think, just sort of took the middle ground between 2 options. It's got adventure ideas for every single plane. So yeah, I didn't find them wildly exciting. I didn't find them wildly groundbreaking, but on the other hand, they gave the sort of detail that you would expect in a campaign setting that the Planescape box set just couldn't give, just because of the scope of the campaign setting. The place that you really want the detail about is Sigil itself, and there are 3 books that really give you everything you need to know about Sigil. Sigil does get a lot of information in the core campaign setting, but these 3 books just really expanded out to being one of the most fleshed out places in D&D. And they are In the Cage, which is a guide to the places in Sigil, the Factuals Manifesto, which is a guide to the factions, and Uncaged, The Faces of Sigil, which is one of the best role-playing books I have ever had the pleasure to read. I cannot praise it enough. It was so good. And if you're only going to get one, that's the one to get.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. So, places are great. It's really cool to know that there is a giant, 50-meter tall, three-eyed horse statue in the middle of the town. But there's a limit to what you can do with that, really. To me, Planescape is about the interesting people that you meet. And Uncaged is a big book of really cool, unique NPCs. From the messenger who you met, who has been cursed to make incredibly loud bell noises, and so he wears an enchanted suit of armor to block out the sounds, and in doing so has put himself in debt that he can never ever pay off to the most powerful crime boss in Sigil.
Aww.
Spoilers. To the Modron who I mentioned, the rogue Modron. They're still completely lawful neutral, but, any deviation from base Modron-ness is being a rogue Modron, who doesn't understand the difference between correlation and causation, and is now trying to figure out what the rules of Sigil are, and many more besides. Each of the characters gets about a 2-page spread, giving their backstory, their goals, how they interact with players, and a little bit of game statistics. What they also do is that all the characters connect to other characters in the book, creating these sorts of webs of who knows whom. And in doing so, creating different plots within the book. Nice. And so you have these different story arcs with these really vivid characters. What's going to happen with these story arcs doesn't give you the adventures, but it definitely gives you enough material that you could run an entire Planescape campaign just set in Sigil, just with this book. And I think it would probably be an amazing campaign.
Cool.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the Factuals Manifesto is another one of those ones where, like the Planes of Law and Conflict and Chaos, where it's not exactly an exciting book, but it's pretty essential. The factions are really sort of the most exciting and accessible thing in all of Planescape. Whether you're going to be a goth Buddhist or a hedonist, existentialist or whatever, the factions are amazing and iconic, and the Factors Manifesto has the information on them. But yeah, Uncaged, really good book. And speaking of absolutely amazing books, there are a bunch of adventures for Planescape, and Dead Gods is generally considered one of, not just the best adventure from Planescape, but one of the best adventures of all time. And as a result, I cannot tell you anything about it except that it's good. Because once we've finished doing the Great Modron March, the real point of the Great Modron March is that it is a prelude to Dead Gods. What I can tell you is that it involves an absolutely epic plot on a scale that makes the god trying to move realms look like child's play. That it actually has two different, basically, campaigns inside it with complementary themes. So the idea is that you intercut them to have a sort of light and shade and contrast. It's really cool. But I can't say more because Claire is not allowed to know the spoilers. Just, it's good. The one I can talk about, which I was wildly impressed with when I read it, and is another one, if I was going to do this again and we were going to start from level 1, I would use this, is Tales from the Infinite Staircase. So in addition to Sigil, there are other ways in which people can travel the plane. There are the rivers, Oceanus and Styx. There's the planar pathways like Mount Olympus. And there's the Infinite Staircase, which is, as it sounds, a staircase that's, well, infinite, right? It's right there in the name. And the Infinite Staircase is this massive Escher-esque staircase that bends in on itself and goes in opposite directions, disobeys the rules of logic or physics, and has multiple landings with doors, and if you go out the door at a particular landing, you will find yourself somewhere. And Tales from the Infinite Staircase is an adventure anthology with the theme of a multiversal plague that is spreading throughout the plane. Except instead of being a normal sort of a plague, which just attacks your body, this is a plague that attacks your imagination.
Whoa.
And so everywhere that this plague touches, people lose their creativity.
Oh, wow.
And with their creativity, they become apathetic and listless. And for whatever reason, though, the plague cannot travel on the infinite staircase. And so the players use it really just as a plot device to go from place to place to try and figure out what's going on, find out what a cure could be, and then implement it while avoiding some people on the planes who actually think this is a good thing and are actively trying to spread it and stop anybody from getting its way.
I want to play this now!
The thing that made me so ridiculously impressed by this adventure anthology is that it's non-linear.
Oh, wow.
There
You
are
know
8...
what? Sounds
Yeah.
like role-playing a game of Pandemic.
Kind of. So all the different locations in it are incredibly inventive and diverse. From one of them is in an abandoned city where people have been trying to imprison dreams. Another one is in the hive of sentient ant monsters.
Whoa.
Another one is on a layer of hell made entirely out of chains.
Ooh.
And when I say it's non-linear, the adventures can be done in any order. And there are notes in the adventures saying, if this adventure is done at this point, if this is the 5th place the players have gone to, or 5th or onwards, these things have happened, modify the adventure in this way.
Whoa.
If the players have been here already, then they unlock this new set of options as a result of what they've already done here.
Whoa.
And so there really is no recommended order. Players are free to go wherever they want, to pop out of somewhere and then come back again later. It gives this massive amount of freedom that you don't normally get in this sort of a book. And I just thought it was such a clever way of structuring. It's basically like a sandbox that happens to be in 8 completely separate planes of existence at once.
Awesome.
Really cool adventure. The actual plague itself is a little bit on the lame side once you get past its high premise, but then if you think of it not as the villain but as just being a plague, then I don't think it's that bad. And the actual villains who are trying to see it spread because they think it's a good thing, they're much more interesting and have much more agency than just a plague. So yeah, I thought that was a great adventure anthology. It also ties into a Forgotten Realms adventure, because TSR experimented with doing these crossovers where they'd have multi-campaign world adventures. So there's a Forgotten Realms adventure in which you have to rescue a god who is being held hostage by a demon prince by travelling on the infinite staircase. Which is, again, the sort of massive, high-level shenanigans that other campaign settings would have as the culmination of their entire arc. And that Planescape thinks that you should be able to do all the time, anytime.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the Multiversal Plague in the Tales from the Infinite Staircase is for levels or about 2 or 3 to 6.
Nice.
So it's really low level. But you can
Nice.
save the world from the pandemic of apathy.
Nice. I like it.
Really cool. In fact, I've been having trouble. I've had to adapt all the adventures to make them high level because your character is so powerful now. Anyway, those are my recommendations. So, have you had any experience with Planescape? Have you had any cool adventures on the planes? Let us know. And we will be back in the future with more Planescape content,
Woohoo.
going into more detail about the planes themselves, the outer planes, and about the factions. But for now, that's us.
Yeah. Cool. What do we say? Do you remember how this ends? Wait, we say goodbye. I think
And keep gaming.
that's the one.
Nailed it.